Well, good afternoon, everyone. Wonderful to see you all. It's a pleasure to be here. And to all of you who may be watching, good afternoon to you. It's such a beautiful day. I really learned a great deal from my presentation last summer. To be directly in touch with people as opposed to distant and unknown readers is a really special thing, and I was very, very happy to be invited back. So, to set the stage just a little bit, my wife and I are members of the Early Acceptance Group, and as an undergraduate, I had the great fortune to study with some leading American poets, Archibald MacLeish and Robert Lowell, who awarded me the Harvard Advocate Poetry Prize my senior year. After graduation, life took its many different directions, but in the past decade, the muse has returned, smiling, fortunately, and I've written some 100 poems in the last 10 years or so. And I thought, given how much we all talk about family and friends, when Joe Moskop invited me to read again, I thought maybe that was a good way to organize what I would present. But I was surprised, as you'll see, about what aspect of family and friends I seem to have focused on over the last 10 years. So you'll hear that. There's a wonderful poem by the English Romantic poet Percy Shelley, actually a poem that's haunted me since I first read it in high school, of all things. So the verse begins, "We look before and after and pine for what is not." And here's the line that got to me. "Our sweetest songs are those that tell of saddest thought." So here's to some saddest thoughts, but tempered, I hope, by a New Year's sweetness into song. I hope you all enjoy, and feel free to comment if something occurs. I know there are no shy people in the room, so I'm happy about that. So this was actually going to be an introduction, which turned into sort of a poem all on its own. It's called Lifelines. I grew up with 2 parents and a sister. I married and had 2 children. One of these children had 2 daughters, my grandchildren. My sister married and had 3 daughters. With their husbands, they created 10 children, 10 grandchildren for my sister, 10 grandnieces and nephews for me. My best friend is my ever-amazing wife of 40 years. Life is unimaginable without her. My 2 best guy friends are, 1, someone I've known since I was 14, and 2, someone I've seen twice in my life. Of course, they're also cousins, especially a brother and a sister, children of my mother's brother, my uncle. There's also the daughter of one of my father's brothers. I grew up also with them. Like a spider web glistening with morning dew, this is the net that supported me. We all have one, at least I hope so. These poems are about those people who are in my web. So the first poem is called The Family Ephemeral. At first light, the hidden sun makes the slow creek flow black as coffee. A brood of ducks feed in the drowsy current, tipping themselves like diving towers, tail feathers in perfect vertical. As a child, nothing was more formidable than family. Yes, grandfather in starched collar and facial hair died years before, insubstantial as his picture yellowing on the carved table. But between my mother and her mother, electricity, as from a Van de Graaff generator, crackled all day. My sister and I dodged these sharp sparks as best we could. Father returns suddenly and everything grows still. He runs upstairs and we are told to be quick about setting the supper table. One day, grandmother falls ill, something in her stomach, and months later she's gone from the hospital bed to join grandfather. Father followed a few years after. We grow and go our own ways, then one day find ourselves standing side by side by mother's grave, in memoriam. This monumental thing, endless and enduring, permanent as the carved president in his marble seat in the vast memorial, this family in childhood is instead ephemeral, is instead vanished. The sun appears, spangling the stream, while the moon bows out, pale as frost. From high above the green flank of the old mountains, the rays of sunlight, barely 8 minutes old, touch our shoulders with tiny, warm fingers, and our hearts fill once again with longing and with dreams. Well, this is a jump to something that occurred while I was in college. It's called wire memory. Anyone working with wires knows their maddening, organic nature to twist and entangle, to snag, like coat hangers or door handles on sleeves and pockets, as if to call you back, as if you had forgotten something, resisting any new shape, pulling back to the geometry of earlier times, nostalgic wire memory. I worked one summer with a family friend, a brilliant scientist, who spent time in his elegant lab letting long strings of beads fall over and over again to see the patterns they made, which beads touched which others, as a means of exploring patterns in living chains, DNA, the tiny wired chemistry of invisible coiled threads that is all life. What was interesting about this scientist, who was a family friend, is he. Oh, sure, thank you. Is he was after like a long stretch in the lab, he'd come home, and his favorite thing was to vacuum the bottom of the swimming pool because it was so so peaceful. And he won a Nobel Prize in addition to vacuuming the bottom of the swimming pool. This was about Mom. It's called On Spanish Trail. The last 10 years of her life after my father passed away, she moved to California and built herself a little house overlooking the San Francisco Bay from Tiburon. Tucked into the hillside above the old Spanish Trail, the vista from Mom's deck swept down from Mount Tam, across the Golden Gate, and eastward to the sun-sparkling windows of the Berkeley Hills. The day she died was like any other, mostly, except that she didn't exhale again. Days later, my task seemed obvious. Find a vista like hers, open the urn of gritty, gold-flecked ash, and let the wind carry her to a burial in the sky. But the steep pitch of the hillside made the muddy footing treacherous. Breathless, choosing a spot one as good as another, I decided the moment had come to release her. But, the wind. I hadn't calculated the wind, which blew the ashes into my face, my eyes, my hair. Struggling to brush them free, and with the other hand to align the urn to the busy air, I finally emptied her. It took some time to clean my shoes, and a long hot shower to clean me. Not that any wind or water would ever suffice. So the friend that I mentioned that I've only seen twice in my life lives in Central California, and I was driving to see him for the second time. I met him on an airplane. It turned out he was majored in English, read poetry, saw me writing a poem on the plane, and that led to this terrific friendship that we have to this day. I send him all my stuff, and he tells me how terrible it is, and it's wonderful. He's a great friend. Merced, which is the town he lives in. Like a white scarf in the wind, the road floats south, across a distant field. The tall palms appear crowned by puffs of green popcorn. On this morning, there is only the highway. The fields dream in the April sun. To care for needs of friends or family takes compromise. Like these spring fields, the needs of another can be muddy, rutted, and there's only one path for you, through. Spade, plow, food, whatever is required, for as long as required, and whatever may be your needs must simply wait their turn. Well, now we skip back to my grandfather, in South America. This poem's called At the Medellin Airfield in Colombia, Medellin, Colombia. I doubt my mother would have married and met my father were it not for the accident at the Medellin Airfield. The New York Times that morning in 1935 portrayed my grandfather, her father, as a man of prominence seeking rare metals in the Andean mountains, a friend of the engineer president H. Hoover, who gifted him a fine signed volume of mining lore. The dire event was a takeoff collision between the passenger ship, as they still called airplanes, and a smaller plane. 3 Americans died, the Times reported. As charred remains were pulled from the steaming double wreck, stunned officials were left to surmise the course of events that had happened. On the smaller craft, there were 2 pilots, an expert German, quote, still holding the throttle, unquote, who somehow simultaneously shot himself so as not to die burning, as was declared per evidence of a discharged pistol with a single cartridge. That the beloved tango star, Carlos Gardel, the Elvis of Argentina, might more likely have been piloting the little plane, drunk, was simply inadmissible, essentially ineffable. Thus the official conclusion, an act of God. Hence the decision, no victims' compensation. My mother's early years in Chile and on Sutton Place were very comfortable indeed. By contrast, my father, the last of an immigrant couple's 12 children, the only one not born in Ukraine, raised by brothers and sisters on the Lower East Side, he rarely spoke of his youth, once recalling, however, how his mother gave him the sweet skin from boiled milk. He worked his way through college, Columbia, fateful homonym, a rare Jew, as there were very few achieving a medical degree in those years. In shock and grief following her husband's immolation, my mother's mother moved her brood to comfortable sufficiency across town, across the park. My uncle left college to work as a mining reporter and eventually a subsequent brilliant career as a mining company executive, picking up where his lost father's thread had been cruelly cut by fate. At a party thrown by my mother's decorator and alcoholic sister, to which the young doctor, now socially advanced by his degree, had been invited, the connection was made, and the rest, as they say. Looking back, our lives are governed by randomness. As for a safe landing on Mars, we wait, breathless, for confirmation, and we only know what will happen after it already has. Even Einstein's defiant claim, God does not play dice with the universe, might rather be a thoughtful question. Does the universe play dice with God across the starry ocean of time? For the scientists among us. And now we go back to grade school. It's called Still Standing. Johnny Gould swung his bat with wrists crossed, the ball sailing far into the forsythia bushes. Paul Dietz, called Pearly Tits in playground patois, and Johnny were crossing guard captains. I was Johnny's first lieutenant, standing tall at my designated corner. Paul went over to Dickie Waterman's house after school, fooling around one afternoon. The .22 rifle discharged, though Dickie mostly recovered after weeks in the hospital. Dickie's mom was Scandinavian, beautiful, the first woman to arouse my little snake. I remember all these things in minute detail, when now I can't recall why I just walked into a room or about what I was just thinking. Time, the shape changer, plays tricks on us all, if we are lucky enough still to be standing. So moving along to grade school to when I was 11, we took a long trip by car to Mexico, where we also had some very distant cousins. Having 10 brothers and sisters, the cousins, my father's cousins, stretched out forever. So here we go. The lone and level sands. "Oh, we are vulgar people," I replied, 11 years old, to show our, or at least my enthusiasm to go see a bullfight. At lunch with distant cousins in a fancy neighborhood of Mexico City, glass shards embedded atop stone garden walls. The trumpets blared, the crowd surged, the sun seared, noise and dust everywhere. Clowns flung themselves over an inner ring of wood to escape the charging horns of the just liberated monster. We sat on the shade side on cushioned padding, as men on padded horses with sharp lances rammed the fresh bull's black shoulders. Noble blood ran down like a señora's red mantilla. The bull shook his huge head, defiant, standing in the center of the ring, owning it. Trumpets cried again as, in glittering gold bolero, the matador strode into the ring, the deafening cheers, a Roman gladiator in armor. Facing they stood, man and beast, power regarding power, a fatal outcome yet undefined. Drums rattled our ears, and the dance of destiny began. The angered, bloody bull sweeping through the matador's red cape, the matador swaying, sidestepping, graceful as a French ambassador at the British court of St. James. Weapon hidden in the cape, the dance progressed, until hurting, wearied, the bull stopped his charge, stilled. Fate's moment had come. Glinting in sunlight, the sword was revealed. As celebrated in ancient Rome, death always wins. But whose? Extraordinary silence swept the vast arena as the proud protagonists regarded each other, unmoving. The bull's heavy horns now lower and slower, essential if the gilded antagonist were to triumph in his pas de mort. Quick, a quiver, sword sunk to the hilt, past the deadly horns, down between hapless shoulders, piercing the very heart. Eyes clouding, the bull sank to its knees, then keeled over. That's a dramatic page turn. Keeled over onto his side, stilled. The matador doffed his black cap, bowing to the ecstatic stadium. An official ran across the sand to cut off the bull's ear and present it to the champion, symbol of a job expertly done. To wild approval, he sent it on to his ladylove, seated in the royal box. A brace of donkeys dragged the now ignominious thing from the arena. Only moments before, an emblem of supreme potency, now become offal, now become food for cats. But death so bravely vanquished, we left the ring, triumphant, smiling as a newly connected family, secure in the luxury of living, at least for a time. The same right celebrated to endless acclaim by Orson Welles and Ernest Hemingway in the golden arena at La Ronda in Spain. They were two towering young bulls of their own time, now gone, but for memory. As the poet's word declaim, "Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. The lone and level sands stretch far away." This has to do with a cousin, a young cousin. It's called Sorting Apples. As you'll see, he was schizophrenic. One night, after the voices had tormented him beyond endurance, he stepped in front of a moving train. Through a clerk's inattention, the grieving family lived in darkness for decades. What happened to our David? The voices had assailed him, insisting, Kill your beautiful mother. What could this mean? Desperate, he resisted, but the voices grew ever more persuasive, wouldn't stop their shrieking. Only the train did. Stray messages, prison photos, anguished love kept bitter hopes alive for years until yet another inquiry finally laid the matter to rest. David died the night after entering an asylum, and then, slipping away unnoticed that evening, he found his true asylum on the Caltrain tracks. Crazy thoughts cross our minds in dreams or waking all the time. Sorting apples, we mostly toss away the bad ones. David died a hero's death, falling on the grenade in his mind, sacrificing himself, saving his family. So this is a poem I wrote just a couple weeks ago about an aunt of my wife's. Well, the poem tells the story, so I'll let the poem do it. It's called About the Cat. Driving at 94 years of age, swerving to avoid an oncoming truck, her front wheel drops into a soft shoulder. Her waning arms no longer command the tires. Left to fend on its own, the car wraps itself around a tree. Crazed with fear, screaming that the hospital staff are all imposters under the command of malevolent people now on the TV screen, she lies, a broken bird, on a huge white bed, purse and phone on her chest, dialing 911 to report an abduction. I'm being held against my will. Then, answering a call from a grandson, she assures him, "Oh, I'm fine, just resting at home." Cracked ribs, broken sternum, she drifts in pain. Sere as an autumn leaf, her head, a skull wrapped in blotchy skin, crowned by cirrus cloud wisps of white. Strange bird sounds emerge from her hanging jaw. Her distress grows worse at evening. Will she even last the night? The doctor shakes his head, unfolding the complications to her son. To calm this loving, demanding mother, aunt, grandmother, great-grandmother, local family arrives in shifts. Despite smarting from her ancient slights and the new arguments that arise among them, what is to be done with her just adopted cat? Hissing, claws out, they disagree among themselves. But options dwindle, and what seemed possible only a few days ago. Yet somehow, she survives the night, eats bites of breakfast, color returning to her cheek, voice stronger. She is unaware that the next step will be rehabilitation, against which she may rebel as she has against this dementia-haunted hospital. She just wants to go home. More days pass, and she dances in and out of coherence, calling family members at 3 a.m. until everyone agrees to turn off phones. Friends or nurses sit with her day and night. A long-departed sister-in-law keeps vigil, standing silent, she says, at her bedside. Then one evening, between the nurses' shifts, she makes her peace with life and dies quietly in her bed. A week later, standing by her open grave at the cemetery in Queens, her son speaks sweetly, movingly, pausing as LaGuardia-bound aircraft pass above like roaring angels, about how she fought for life till the end. We watch until the last tender shovelful of dirt clatters down to her. Family feud now resolved, the companionable cat will enjoy retirement in the land of palm trees and sunshine. But their misunderstanding, their upset, was never really about the cat. Well, you've all been a fabulous audience. So to conclude on a somewhat brighter note, I'm going to reread a poem that I read last summer called The Fox. The Fox. We no longer killed animals for our adornment. My mother had a fox fur, its mouth made into a clasp. Worn on special occasions, she looked quite elegant in veiled hat. I was fascinated by its mouth, clasp holding the tail. Was it really alive? Run in the woods? Hide in bushes behind rocks? They made a fine couple, Mom and Dad, dressed for their square dances. He in Mexican bolero jacket with eagle embroidered, holding a snake. She in wide, brightly colored skirt, which she flashed when she twirled. My father's first fiancée left him at the altar for an alternative suitor, for which my sister and I are eternally grateful. Not his life's first surprise, as Dad was born, stillborn, the last of 12, so they covered him, until a guest at the Shiva happened to see his little white coverlet move, and proudly he survived. The fox, not as lucky, but Mom really did look good in it. Thank you very much. I'm waving to the people who may be there at some point.